Good evening. The Gaithersburg Board of Appeals meeting is now in session. Today is February 14th, 2024. Our first item on the agenda, is the call to order, so we just did that. And so the second item on the agenda is the election of officers for the next year. And we're going to do the election in two steps. The first will be the chair, and the second will be the vice chair. And so at this time, I'd like to nominate Aaron Kotak as the chair. May I have a second?
I'll second.
All right. Any other nominations from the floor for chair? Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes 6-0. And congratulations, Aaron, as becoming our new chair.
Right, thank you.
Okay. All right. The second item.
Effective as of
Next meeting, effective as of next meeting. Yes, thank you. Unless you want to do the chair switch like right now.
You're good.
Okay. And
Well, let me interrupt. So how long have you been the chair?
I've been the chair since, it was 2017, so that would be almost 7 years.
And before that, you were on the Board of Appeals for how long?
13 years. It'll be 20 years come May this year.
Are you staying with us?
Well, so far so good. So thank you.
Yep.
All right. Any other comments before we move on? The next item on the agenda, or the next election is vice chair. Do we have any nominations?
I'd like to nominate Carol Reed as vice chair.
Okay. Are there any seconds?
Second.
Okay. Are there any other nominations for vice chair? It's uncontested. Okay, so all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the motion passes 6-0. Okay, thank you very much. All right, that's it for the election of officers. Moving forward now, we have the approval of the minutes from the December 13th, 2023 meeting. May I get a motion to approve these minutes?
I make a motion to approve the minutes from the, do I have to say that?
No, that's good.
To approve the minutes from the last meeting.
Okay, thank you. May I have a second?
I'll second.
All right, any comments on the minutes themselves? All right. Okay, so all those in favor of the approval of the minutes from December 13th, 2023 say aye.
Aye.
And did we count you, Philip? Yes. Okay, you said aye. Okay, great. And those opposed? Okay. Approval of the minutes passes with a vote of 6-0. All right, so tonight, we have our discussion topics, just one item on the agenda for this evening, and we're going to learn about the Retool Gaithersburg. There's going to be a presentation to us this evening on the draft zoning ordinance update, and I'll turn it over to Caroline to see if she'd like to provide us additional information.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you all for being here and to go over all of this. Just to clarify, there are going to be some work sessions on the entire zoning ordinance rewrite that Greg will give you more information at the end of this. But we just wanted to focus exclusively on the changes to sections that relate to the Board of Appeals and give you all a chance to take a look at that and answer any questions you may have. But then the more comprehensive reviews of the effort will be in a few weeks during some work sessions. So for those of you who may or may not have been following along, the city has undertaken a comprehensive rewrite of our zoning ordinance, which had not been comprehensively redone since the mid-1960s, Greg tells me, and which isn't to say that there haven't been text amendments through the years, but it hasn't had a whole lot, anything comprehensively done since then. So this updates the entire zoning ordinance. There's a lot of new graphics, some new processes, updated language, kind of gets it more into the 21st century, cleans up some things that were always problematic for us, and does provide some new guidance on development for 2024. So well, I'll just go over the Board of Appeals sections. Well, there are a couple of organizational changes. There are some changes to Board of Appeals processes, but mostly the zoning ordinance really confirms the three items that the board is tasked with, which is deciding variances, special exceptions, and administrative appeals. So the first change is right now, under the current code, the Board of Appeals section is encompassed in Article 7, and the whole thing is between sections 24-185 to 24-193. In the draft new code, the Board of Appeals sections are separated into two different articles. Article 11 has all of the information about the administration of the Board of Appeals that establishes its authority through the state. It goes through Board of Appeals procedures, terms of members, decision-making, all of that procedural information is in Article 11. And then in Article 12 is all of the sections related to special exceptions, variances, and administrative reviews. So you have to look in two different sections for that now. But now that it's split up, all of the other administrative bodies are the mayor and council and the planning commission and all, or you can see each of them in Article 11 as well. So that kind of made some more logical sense. Special exceptions, not too much different. The definition of special exception remains the same, and I would say of the three areas that you all review, it's probably had the least amount of change. So I'll just read it since it's on the screen. It's the definition of a special exception is a grant of a specific use that would not be appropriate generally or without restriction and shall be based on a finding that the requirements of the zoning law governing the special exception on the subject property are satisfied and the use of the subject property is consistent with the plan and is compatible with the existing neighborhood. So it's really just for uses that need some extra guardrails maybe or an extra review and may or may not be appropriate in different zones depending on the conditions in that particular place. One thing that is changing among special exceptions is that a lot of the uses that were previously listed as special exceptions in the MXD and CD zones will no longer be special exceptions. They're now listed as conditional uses to be approved by the city council. And the reason for that is there was always a conflict between things in those two zones. The uses needed to be approved by the city council as part of a schematic development plan, and that was kind of in conflict with the approval of a special exception. So did I say that proper? Is that the accurate way of reflecting that?
Yeah, it's always been kind of strange, right?
Yeah.
The mayor and city council would approve a use, but then the same use would have to come before the Board of Appeals
Yeah.
for another approval at a later stage. So we just cleaned that up and just left it with the mayor and city council, since they are typically making that decision anyway as part of that process.
Okay.
But on the flip side, there are some other new uses that have been included in the zoning ordinance that we did, uses that weren't really listed at all before, that are now in certain zones going to be considered special exception uses. So this is just a list of different uses that can be special exceptions. It doesn't mean they're always special exceptions. There's a new table in the draft zoning ordinance, so you would look by zone to see if the use was a special exception in any particular zone. And some of them will look very familiar to you, but there are things like a triplex dwelling unit, firearm sales, gambling establishments. I think heavy and light industrial was maybe not a use that the Board of Appeals has reviewed. Retail store with gas, short-term rentals, small-scale recycling, and waste processing private. Those are all uses that you've not seen in the past that you may see in the future.
What is private waste processing?
I think it's like small scale. There are industrial uses that do kind of small scale recycling for their own purposes, and
Yeah.
is that
Yeah, you're right.
okay?
It's like small scale private waste management, right? Instead of being done at sometimes it's done by governments or arms of a government agency. And sometimes they're also privately operated, so.
Okay, thank you.
And there's a very helpful definition of terms at the end of the
Yeah,
draft as well, so it's actually defined. Privately owned facility that receives, stores, and/or processes waste or recycling materials.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So and what was the background on the additional items being added to the special exception uses there?
Well, some of the uses are just uses we've never had before
Okay.
in the zone, like for instance, firearm sales. I don't think we had that as a category. So that seems like kind of a natural thing that if you're gonna include it as a use, you wanna have that extra layer of review that make sure that it is compatible with whatever location they're proposing. Some, like another one, retail store with gas, or
Yeah.
things like Wawa or Sheetz or things like that that probably didn't exist in 1965 or whenever. So there are things that have been added that just need an extra review.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if you want to add anything to any of those other uses that I keep turning to Greg because he's actually wrote with the outside consultant most of this, so he was kind of more heavily involved in every different section than I was. So I just want to make sure I'm covering it all properly. Okay, so those are the special exception uses. Findings for special exception are almost identical to what they currently are. I think there are 8 of them. There's a little bit of language that we removed. There were things in the old zoning ordinance that kind of language that's kind of no longer used to describe compatibility standards, and we took those out, but the language is essentially the same, and the findings really are, you need to find the same set of things to approve a special exception as you did before. So I'm not going to read through all of them, but I'll make this whole thing available for all of you after the meeting so you can review it all. But it's not that much different than it was in the past. That hasn't changed much at all.
Is the actual text, as reflected on that screen, specifically will cause no objectionable? Is that the actual text?
Yes, this is the actual text. And that, I think, is the same as it was in the past. This one will be consistent with either the master plan and/or the current City of Gaithersburg strategic plan. That's new language. The strategic plan was not ever referenced before. So that's a change. These are the same. So this is the other change to special exceptions. I think I made reference to this a couple of months ago. We reviewed, maybe for the second or third time, some minor window changes, if you may recall, to a special exception. And we did not have the ability in the past to take small, very minor changes to special exceptions and review them as staff, which we did have the ability to do through the site plan process and have been doing it for years and years. There's always been a minor amendment to a site plan for things that did not require going back to the Planning Commission, but we never had that ability with the Board of Appeals. So we had applicants coming back to you for very minor changes at a much higher cost to them, and a lot of staff time, your time, their costs, that was kind of unnecessary. So what we've done in this draft is provide the ability for minor amendments to special exceptions to be approved as a staff approval, basically with the same process that we currently have for staff approvals of site plans. And these are the list of things that would be processed that way: retaining walls and fences, minor revisions to building elevations and site plan details that do not add onto buildings or expand the footprints. So in other words, if someone were adding 200 square feet to a special exception, it would come to you. If they're changing a window, it would not. Minor landscaping, parking layout, and pedestrian and sidewalk access revisions, and then anything you might delegate to staff, maybe through a condition. You might say, put a condition on that something could be approved by staff in the future. And the one thing we had been doing it for was minor modifications to existing telecommunications facilities. So when they swap out antennas, they have not been coming back to you for several years now. That change had been made, but none of the others had.
That was going to be my question. It was
Yeah.
like, we haven't seen much on telecommunications lately.
Because
Okay.
mostly everything is just swapping out antennas at this point. There aren't that many new facilities being established anymore. But you'd still get a few, maybe every year or two, where you think there are still some. We haven't done a tower in a very long time, but there are still some rooftops that have come through the Board of Appeals. But when they come and they tweak either the number of antennas or the size of the antenna on an established telecommunications facility, that you're not seeing those anymore.
Would one of the microcell towers that they put on top of telephone poles?
They are not part of the telecommunications ordinance, so they don't come to the Board of Appeals.
Wasn't there something, Carol, with the federal law that took all that off our plate?
There have been changes over time that, it makes it harder so yes, that's probably why that change was made several years ago. Yeah. You have less ability to restrict them than you used to. On to variances. The definition also, I think, is the same. Modification only of the density, bulk, dimensional, or area requirements in the zoning law that is not contrary to the public interest and where owing to conditions peculiar to property and not because of any action taken by the applicant, a literal enforcement of law would result in unnecessary hardship or practical difficulty as specified in zoning law. So that definition has not changed. I know you all just went through a couple of different variances, and what we didn't have were findings for the variance the way we do for special exceptions. So we only had that definition to make a determination whether or not it met that definition. So we have put findings in. So similar to special exception, you will need to go through each of these findings and make a or the applicant will need to establish this in their statement, and then the Board of Appeals will review it to concur that the findings have been met. And they, remember how many there are. There's 6 of them.
I appreciate the new inclusion of this.
Yeah, I hopefully will make your job a little more straightforward, a little more focused, so you know what you're looking for. So if we want to read through them, we can read through them. So
It's still similar, but
yeah, it's
to
kind
what
of
was
an
done before,
expansion
really
of the
not a dramatic
definition.
change.
So the first one is and we kind of pulled these from doing research on what other jurisdictions have for variance findings, and also related to our own definition. So they're kind of a conglomeration of a bunch of different definitions. So the first one is relative to surrounding properties. The property is peculiar in some manner, such as, but not limited to, dimension, grade, or environmental constraint. Second one, the peculiarity of the property was not due to any action taken by the petitioner. 3, the literal enforcement of zoning law would result in unnecessary hardship or practical difficulty and would deprive the petitioner of the rights commonly enjoyed by others in similar areas that have many of the same features of the subject property. 4, the variance request has no effect on an adjacent property owner's use or enjoyment of their property. 5, the variance request is consistent with the purposes of this chapter and does not confer on the petitioner a special privilege that would be denied other petitioners. And 6, all development associated with a variance request is appropriately scaled, designed, and cited. So
Thank
those
you,
are
thank
your
you for that
findings.
last bullet point there. Yeah.
That hopefully will be helpful. Administrative reviews, there are some changes too as well. So the same number of things are under administrative reviews, that they are reviews of any final order, requirement, decision, or determination by the Planning Commission, Historic District Commission, or city manager or designee's final decision, and that's where the change is. Historically, administrative review, you could have an administrative review of a staff decision, and it came straight to you. Some of those have resulted in very
Fence permits.
long
The fence permits.
fence permit.
You
Yeah,
may remember a fence permit.
I do.
I'll bet you do.
There've been several. They result in a lot of long meetings with a lot of exhibits and presentations, and I'll let Frank talk about this, and because this was Frank's thought, was to have a kind of an intermediate decision-making before it gets to the Board of Appeals, so that by the time it gets to you, similar to a decision of the Planning Commission or the Historic District Commission, it's on the record, and it's based on an established record.
Yeah, I won't, I think you kind of said Frank will explain it, then you explained it, so I appreciate that. That always makes it easy when that happens. Usually my wife does that, by the way. But the appealing a direct permit, frequently what you have is going into a rights-based process where you have briefs on one side, briefs on another side, arguments back and forth. There's really not a lot of opportunity for a straightforward discussion to say, well, look, this fence is allowed by the law, here's the law. If there's any change that can be made, that conversation can happen. But when the only route is to come here for that kind of a dispute, that's kind of putting you in that situation where the other thing is, in dealing with it, you're essentially a trial board, not really an appellate board, because we simply issued a permit. There was no, there's no record, there's nothing more than simply an application and a permit decision, and then perhaps some emails of, if we're dealing with the fence, of some folks that had a concern. For me, I just finished a 2-year course on conflict management and conflict resolution, and one of the elements that many of the classes dealt with is taking the most strict rights-based approach always the best way to go. And actually, in discussion with Caroline and Greg back and forth, kind of decided, well, let's see if we can establish something that A, would give the chance for more direct face-to-face, to perhaps resolve some of the concerns, but B, if it does come to the board, have the board have you serve as a true appellate body, where you're actually looking at something in the record, and that way if somebody is alleging a legal error, you've got a basis to make that decision, rather than having to conduct a hearing on your own to decide between the relevancy of, okay, you don't like the fence, as opposed to this shows a factual error, or this shows a legal error, which is really what you're here to do. So,
Right.
I kind of restated to some extent what Caroline just said, but
Much
that was
better.
the thinking behind it.
So there'll be this extra step where somebody that has an issue with a staff decision or a order will be able to go to the city manager for a hearing with city manager and.
Or designate.
Or designee. And then the decision that comes out of that will be the final order that could be appealed to the Board of Appeals.
So with that, the idea is that we are then, like you said, deciding matter of fact or law having been incorrect. When the city manager or designee reviews or has that, hearing is the wrong word, but that meeting.
Yeah.
Is that recorded in the same way as you know, say a planning board meeting or something?
Yeah, it would be recorded,
Okay.
yeah. So there would be a full record of it, and then anything that was submitted would be exhibited, have exhibit numbers, and then that would all come to you as a full record.
Perfect. Thank you.
I think that's the end of, those are the kind of the big picture changes to the Board of Appeals sections, and I'll let Greg talk about the, well, if you guys have any more questions about that, we should do that first.
Any more questions? No? Okay.
Okay.
So there are a number of other changes, obviously, to the code. We are giving the Planning Commission and the Mayor and City Council an update on that, a joint work session. There's actually 2 scheduled right now. The first one's February 26th. The next one after that's March 11th. I would encourage everyone to attend. We can watch it virtually if you don't want to come in person, obviously. I've also emailed you guys ahead of this meeting the entire code, but also a Cliff Notes version of the code that hits a lot of the highlights that we thought the general public would be interested in. There's a lot of minutiae, obviously, in the code that most people don't really care about, but we wanted to hit at least the high-level stuff that would affect the everyday resident in the city. So again, if you have anything to look at, I would say definitely look at that high-level Cliff Note version, because that will hit you at least the highlights of a lot of those changes that will affect the general resident every day in the city. And then after that, right now we have scheduled on April 15th the actual joint public hearing on this amendment of the code, the repeal and replace of it, with hopefully having everything wrapped up before the council's August recess. So right now we're tentatively looking at July 15th as hopefully having this adopted. So again, you know how to get a hold of me, you know how to get a hold of Caroline. We're happy to hear if you have any questions or concerns with anything that's in the entire code update, or of anything you heard tonight, obviously, as well.
Thank you, Greg. That's a lot of work, so
That's a lot of work.
appreciate the fast forward of, what is it, 60 years now of
Yeah.
of work.
It'll be a little different from the last time we did this.
Almost, yeah. So thank you.
So there's nothing else from anyone tonight. That's all staff has to present to you.
Yep.
Okay. Any other comments? Frank, any other comments? Okay.
No. No.
Caroline, no?
Well, first of all, thank you, Carol, for all of your many
Oh,
years
thank you.
of service to the board. Sure you've run many a difficult meeting, and we really appreciate that.
Well,
And
also in advance for helping me,
Yes.
because it'll be needed.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
and congratulations to Aaron. We are looking forward to
Congratulations
to that
to
as
Aaron.
well.
Let's give him a hand for stepping up.
And the next
Thank you.
meeting is scheduled for March 13th. Don't know if there's anything yet that we will have on the agenda, but it's a little too soon to say. But that's-
Okay.
We did forget one important thing.
What's that?
Happy Valentine's Day.
Yes, happy Valentine's Day to everyone.
There's not one
Thank you.
bit of red in this whole meeting.
Well, I don't know, Frank's tie, it's close, and so is
Yeah,
Greg,
tie.
A
so,
little bit on the microphones.
yeah, yeah. Okay, well, thank you, Caroline. Is there anything else from the board? Any other additional comments? Okay, if not, then this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you for coming.